i miei genitori. Le radici sono tutto. Mia madre e mio padre mi hanno fatto capire l'importanza del sacrificio, dell'onestà e dell'amore verso il prossimo. Io sono il terzo di 5 figli. Da mio padre ho preso la rettitudine, ma anche la sobrietà dei sentimenti. Ricordo che i miei erano misurati, anche quando succedeva qualcosa di cui gioire.
I'm going to read Dr. Gratteri's speech because I think many of the people here do not speak Italian, and as my husband will always complain, my Italian isn't good enough either, so I'm very grateful that we've had a translation of the speech, and I'm going to read it, taking from the beginning, which Dr. Gratteri already started. Every time I look at myself in the mirror, I realize that more and more I resemble my parents. Roots are everything. My father and my mother made me understand the importance of sacrifice, of honesty, of loving your neighbor, and from my father I learned rectitude, also temperance of feeling. I remember that my parents were measured, even when an event happened that justified being joyful. They said, "Pari brutti," meaning it is ugly to express excessive joy, as we do wrong to those who are worse off than us and who have no reason to rejoice. In the 1950s, my father Francesco bought a small truck in which he carried grain and gravel around the villages of Gratteri in Calabria for farmers and merchants. Later, he took over a general store from his uncle and began to sell pasta, as well as wine he made himself, with grapes bought in Tyrol. He spent the last 15 years of his life in a wheelchair as a result of a stroke, which also left him unable to speak, but he spoke eloquently with his eyes. From my infancy, I was very lively and never sat still, but a glance from my father sufficed to bring me to a stop, and I would often be punished. To this day, I remember all the reasons for which my father would give me a cuff, but what I remember best is his generosity. He had a piece of land where he grew everything. Every year, he harvested 2 pigs, one for the family and one for the local poor people. There would be a festival and a great sense of community. In Gratteri, almost everybody would buy with the libretta on credit. They would pay once a year after they sold their livestock at the market of the Madonna del Carmine. And my father would say, "For them, they also have to eat," so as to justify their continuous delays in payment. My mother, like my father, was very restrained in showing her feelings, but she also knew how to be sweet and affectionate, while being very strong. She sized people up with a glance, her judgments were final, and she never made a mistake about people. Like my father, she had studied very little, finishing only 3rd grade. When she was young, instead of school, girls would go to a seamstress to learn how to sew. I too went through a similar routine, and for that I am very grateful to my parents. As a boy, every summer I learned a trade. I was a cobbler with Master Felice, then a mechanic, a baker, and a labourer. I learned how to be with people and how to understand the importance of work and sacrifice. In school, I remember one classmate, a quiet boy, whose father was ambushed and killed by the mafia. He didn't like being asked about it, and many years later, he ended up like his father, having entered the same clan. Yet another of my playmates, whom I later confronted in court, who like me was the son of farmers, lived near my aunt Savina, in the Gabella quarter of Gratteri, and we would play hide and seek. As he grew up, he began to hang out with the Cataldo clan, and in the course of the search, the police found an arsenal in his house. As prosecutor, I sought and obtained his conviction for illegal association with mafia activities and possession of military arms and ammunition. In court, we looked each other in the eye and said many things without speaking, then our paths parted again. Besides being lively, I didn't study much. I had an excellent memory and could remember everything my teacher said in class. Then when I got home, I got on my bike and pedaled for hours. Every now and again I played soccer, but I wasn't very good. Later, I bought a motorbike and started to enjoy the pleasure of speed, zooming around like crazy. I would work on many different things to keep myself busy, and in 1974, having helped my parents with the grape harvest, I took a ride around Gratteri on a friend's motorbike, a Caballero. It was September, still hot, and I did a thoughtless U-turn and was bowled over by a passing Citroen. The impact was horrible, and I was in a coma for 12 days, then unable to walk for 3 months. My father had my motorbike tied to the rafters of our garage, and after that, I was on foot. The next year, something happened that changed my life. My uncle, Antonino, my mother's brother, became seriously ill. He was diagnosed with a pancreatic tumor and died in a short time. He was a highly regarded civil lawyer who knew the classics and could recite Shakespeare's tragedies by heart. In his last months, we slept at my grandmother Sina's house, and in the evenings I sat by his bed and was enchanted by the stories he shared. I realized that I had to change my life and began to study. Having received my high school degree, I enrolled in the University of Catania Law School. I went there to get away from Messina, where many of my friends and acquaintances from Gratteri had signed up. I began to study furiously, shaved only once a week, and almost never went out at night, staying home and reading everything. But I was obsessed with time and the need to get my work done. I ate yogurt, tomatoes, and sandwiches, and scarcely slept at all, and usually fell asleep with the lights on. One night during a storm, a short circuit set fire to my bedding, but luck was with me that time. I also slept very little because I felt guilty about my family and didn't want to spend too much of their money. My brother and sister had been to university before me, and there were 2 more children who were still studying. Also, my father was not well. He was slowly expiring in his wheelchair, but with his eyes bright and proud as ever. I was able to graduate in just 4 years. At the ceremony, there was only my roommate, Antonio Angelico, who is today a lawyer in the province of Syracuse. I was very happy, but when I went back home, I pretended it was nothing. Like my father, I learned how to keep my emotions under control. I always wanted to do something for the region I came from, but I have always hated bullies. After I earned my degree, the idea came to me to take the examination to become a magistrate, but I kept the notion to myself. I went to my uncle's old law firm and began to prepare myself for the examination. For 2 years, uninterruptedly, I was glued to a chair. Nobody knew what I was doing, but my mother's words wandered through my mind, obsessed as she was with the idea of not making a brutta figura, of not making a spectacle of myself. How many times I have heard the same words. I passed the written test, 17th out of 12,000 candidates. When I passed the oral exam, my father and I communicated with